The Theater History Podcast is supported by HowlRound, a Knowledge Commons by and for the theater community. It's available on iTunes and howlround.com. Hi, and welcome to the Theater History Podcast. I'm Mike Leager, your host, and I'm really happy to have Professor Barbara Fuchs with me here today. She teaches English and Spanish at UCLA, and she's got a really interesting new project called Diversifying the Classics. So, Barbara, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I wonder if you could explain a little bit about the so-called Spanish Golden Age and the dramas that it produced.
Yeah, so this is a wonderful period in the history of Spanish theater. There are hundreds of plays written. Theater is, I would say, the most popular and important cultural form in the period. And it strikes me that in the Anglo world, we're very, very familiar with Shakespeare, to a lesser degree with the Elizabethans, but that we don't know very much about this wonderful canon of plays that just happened to be written in Spanish.
And you say that they're prolific. I mean, it's something like 1,000 plays from this period, around 400 by Lope de Vega alone?
Yes, the numbers are tremendous. And that means that there's so much out there for us still to discover. You know, there's a small subset of those plays that are studied and produced in Spanish, and an even smaller subset that is available to the English-speaking world. So we're very excited at the possibility of making them better known and also of producing translations that can be used by practitioners who might want to take a chance on these plays.
And having read the translations, they're readable, they're playable. I think we can dig into them in a little bit, but they're good. They're fun for someone who doesn't know a lot about this period, just speaking personally.
Thank you.
You write in a recent HowlRound article that you had about the Diversifying the Classics project that there's this almost sort of bias against Spanish drama of this period. You said, and I'm quoting you here, it's exotic, too religious, obsessed with honor. That's how people see it. And I wonder if you could talk about that bias a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a long and complicated history of the literary relations between Spain and England, or the English-speaking world, that the US has sort of inherited from England. And as part of that, I would say literary history has picked up on a lot of the military or imperial rivalries in the early modern period. And the consequence is what I call sort of the Armada paradigm, where there's a much more combative relationship to Spanish literature and a much more prejudiced approach to Spanish literature than I think there needs to be. And when I look at the history of how the theater from Spain is received in the English-speaking world, I see a lot of critics who confirm their own prejudices. That is, they find the plays that they set out to find. They find in them the themes that they set out to find. And certainly within, as we said, thousands of plays, there are plays that are obsessed with honor. There are plays that are about religion. There are plays that show a very limited range of action for women. But there are also plays that are the opposite of that. And the canon is so diverse that it seems to me that it's our responsibility, in fact, to show just how far it ranges.
And I wondered if briefly you might say something about what are the plays that we normally do encounter? Undergraduates in a theater survey course, what are they probably going to run into?
Right. So the two big ones here are Fuente Ovejuna, Lope de Vega's play about the villagers who, faced with an overlord who is sexually rapacious and unfair, decide to take matters into their own hands. It's a wonderful play in that it opens itself up to a number of political interpretations. It actually includes some possibility for female agency, and it's a play that was very exciting to anyone interested in sort of collective forms of political agency. So that's one. And the other is Calderón's Life is a Dream, which, again, fascinating play about interiority and sort of the limits of political action, man and his fate, etc. Beyond those two, I would say we get into the most problematic in terms of how they are, how they might prejudice people against the canon, and those are Calderon's what are called the wife murder plays, right? The plays in which Calderon essentially shows a husband who takes matters into his own hands and at the merest suspicion of dishonor from his wife, decides to have her killed. Now, those are the plays that I think have done the most damage to people's sense of this canon. And so, but even Fuente Ovejuna, which is a play that I think is so interesting in other aspects, right, gives you this picture of a society where honor and the kind of defense of honor is the most important value. Um, the plays that I think one might juxtapose to that are plays that are far more sophisticated, plays that are about Madrid in the early modern period. They're about what happens in a city where you get to invent yourself and be whoever you want to be. There are plays about costume and cross dressing and putting on and taking off identities. Um, in a way, I think that this parallel corpus that we are trying to bring before practitioners and before viewers is really a much more modern one. And it coexists with the plays that I described to you earlier.
I wondered if you could maybe just talk a little bit before we get into the plays themselves about the Diversifying the Classics project. We've touched on some of it, but just sort of what is the sort of mission here? What will listeners find if they go to its website, which we will link to in the show notes?
Yeah, so, I am a scholar of Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. I think the Shakespeare canon is magnificent. But I also think that it is too bad if, for our engagement with the classics, we think only about Shakespeare or we go always to Shakespeare. I think that's particularly problematic as the US becomes a more and more diverse nation. And as I think the spaces really open up for us to think about what other traditions might have classics that we might want to explore and put before students, put before audiences. So, Diversifying the Classics is really a project that aims at, on various fronts, making audiences and students aware of what's out there within the Hispanic classical tradition. To say, by all means, continue exploring that Shakespeare, but maybe before translating Shakespeare into Spanish or doing a Hispanicized version of Shakespeare, think about what you might do with Lope de Vega. Think about where else you might go to, say, give a Spanish flavor to the classics. So on our website, we are putting up all the translations that we've done, along with the Spanish original of the plays. We are working with various theater practitioners in LA to develop curricula for elementary schools and now also for high school students based on the translations that we're doing, so that if a teacher or a drama specialist were to go to our website, he or she could say, oh, this is how you might put together a lesson plan based on these plays. This is what you could do with them in the classroom. And we're very excited about that side of the project. We're also working on a book of monologues based on the Comedia, on the Hispanic classical theater, because we think that in order to expand the canon in this way, we really have to make it available to people who are training in the theater. And if you can't do an audition monologue from these plays, then you don't get acquainted with them at the right moment. So all of these things, as we are producing them, will also be available on the website. The main people involved in this project are a group of graduate students, faculty, and theater practitioners at UCLA and in the LA area. We meet about every 2 weeks and work on the translations together, work on these various initiatives together.
I wondered if we might start talking about some of these translations. In particular, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with your translation of Guillén de Castro's The Force of Habit.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to hear my terrible undergraduate Spanish come out now, but La Fuerza de Costumbre?
That's right, La Fuerza de la Costumbre. Yeah.
This is a really interesting kind of one of those nature nurture questions that really seems to obsess people in the early modern period. Could you tell us a little bit about the play and perhaps sort of what you find so interesting about it?
Yeah, so this is a play that critics began talking about in the early years of the 21st century, and it really spoke to us because it was so interested in questions that we are interested in now. And so this is the story of two siblings, Felix and Hippolyta, who have sort of been brought up in the opposite gender, as it were. So the mother and the father had an illicit relationship. The father is forced to flee to the battlefield, and he takes the female baby, Hippolyta, with him, while the boy stays with his mother. So she's very fearful and keeps him very close to her. And Hippolyta is raised on the battlefield with a sword in her hand. So when the grandfather dies and the parents can be reunited, suddenly it's time to make everyone assume their proper positions in terms of the social mores of the time. The play is fascinating because it has what I, as a literary critic, like to call a messy middle that goes on for a very long time. So even though it ends with everyone restored to what we might think of as the very sort of conservative, boys will act as boys and girls will act as girls position, in the middle, we get wonderful scenes of, Hippolyta bemoaning her fate and resisting being separated from her sword, teaching her brother how to be a man, and the kind of gender trouble that it brings up in that messy middle, I think is really fascinating. So it's a great play for sort of putting some pressure on the idea that there's anything given about gender roles, and for reminding us that we're not the first to think about the constructiveness of those gender roles. And it's really quite fascinating, I think, to see that in an early modern context. It's a wonderful play in that there's definitely a possible reading that is very conservative, but it's a great test case for seeing how a text that might appear conservative, that is, everyone does the expected thing at the end, can also open up this incredible set of possibilities in the middle.
Yes, and I know that the idea is not to compare it necessarily to Shakespeare, but it is striking to see this sort of playing with gender in light of something like, say, Twelfth Night, and think, okay, so somebody else is doing this, and they have a completely different perspective, and it's not just through the lens of Shakespeare or other early modern English playwrights that we might think of.
Absolutely. And one of the important differences, of course, is that in Spain, although there was a lot of nervousness about this, there were actresses on stage. So in Spain, when you have plots about cross dressing or you have plots about, gender roles or gender constructedness, it's not because you somehow have to deal with the material constraints of only having boys on stage. No, they are writing cross-dressing plots for actresses, for famous actresses to show what they can do. And so, as you say, I think it really gives us a much broader and comparative range in which to think about how these problems of gender are considered.
So the next play that you have is A Wild Night in Toledo by Lope de Vega, the very prolific playwright that we mentioned earlier. This is a really interesting play with a really great heroine at its center, Lizena, more or less that's how you pronounce it.
Yes, absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about A Wild Night in Toledo?
Yeah, so A Wild Night in Toledo is this amazing, almost farce of a play about different plots all getting resolved in this one very busy inn. And this is an example, I think, of how urban and urbane the plays can be, right? This is a play about everyone coming to Toledo for festivities and all the mix ups and complications. But Toledo and the inn are also the spaces in which, in this case, our heroine doesn't pass as a boy, but she passes as a maid, right? So she's an upper class woman who, abandoned by her lover, decides to take matters into her own hand, and takes up a job at the inn as a serving maid, and proceeds to play everyone and move everyone as though they were pieces on a chess set, and eventually gets what she wants, right? So it's both a wonderful play to show off a whole company of actors. When we had it done as a reading in the UCLA theater department, even even their professor Michael Hackett had to take a role because there were so many roles to fill. So it's both a play, there's a showcase for all of these actors, but then it also really showcases Lisena and her amazing agency as she pulls all the strings. So it's very funny. It's sort of full of sex and other illicit goings on in this inn, and there's something respectable going on in the background. They're all there because these are festivities for the birth of a prince or something like that. But really, everyone is there for the long holiday and the opportunities it brings.
I don't know how good of an analogy this is, but it sort of put me in mind of a version of the play that could be called something like A Wild Night in Vegas. I don't know if that's what Toledo exactly means in comparison, but that's sort of the vibe that you get from this setting.
Right, something like that. Let's say they're there for a political convention or something, but that is just the excuse. And in fact, there are all these personal goings on. Yeah.
And I wondered if you could talk a little about the urban setting, because again, I think this is an aspect of these plays that we don't normally think of if we're talking about Fuente Ovejuna, if we're talking about Life is a Dream.
Yeah, so the theater in Spain is very closely connected to the growth of Madrid. Philip II decides to make Madrid his capital, and it grows exponentially over a few decades. And the growth of the theater is very much about, this new version of the city where showing off is very important, where having a public persona is very important if you're a noble person or if you're part of the court. At the same time, there are real opportunities for anonymity in a place that big, right? So, in one of the plays I really love, which has been abundantly translated, it's not one of the ones we're translating, called Don Gil of the Green Breeches. It's generally translated as by Tirso de Molina. Again, one of these spurned young women comes to Madrid. And as she's approaching the city, it becomes clear that she can do whatever she likes. She can be whoever she likes because she's anonymous in Madrid in a way that she isn't in her small town. In that play, she decides to wear a pair of green breeches when she dresses up as a man. And she's so successful, so erotically successful as a man, that pretty soon all the real male characters in the play wear green breeches too. So by the end of the play, you have 4 or 5 Don Gils of the green breeches running around stage, and it makes for wonderful confusion. But Lope, writes plays about fashion in the city, about the things that people do. The carriage is very important in some of these plays because suddenly women can get out and can be in a private space outside their house, away from male supervision. One of the plays that I translated a couple years ago, which has just been published, is a Lope play that was just rediscovered in the Biblioteca Nacional. It's called Women and Servants. And you can see in that title who is not present, right? So this is a play, again, about women and servants getting around masters and fathers, husbands, and doing whatever they like. And it's a play set in Madrid and where the role of, the park is almost a character in the play, right? The women pretend to take a medicine that supposedly calls for exercise after you take it. And that's how they get out to the park so they can meet, the men who are courting them. So, and this all makes it into the plays, and it reminds us, that they're very much about a place that is very sophisticated, witty, urbane. In that way, I think they're almost more like restoration comedy, really, if you want an analogy on the English side, right? Where that kind of urban and urbane background is very, very important to the story.
Yes, and you mentioned Women and Servants, which is the third play that's available on the project's website at the moment. And again, you have a strong female character who kind of moves the chess pieces to her liking.
Exactly. These are two sisters. This play is actually fascinating in terms of class as well as in terms of gender. So you have two sisters in this play who want to marry what we would call something like middle class men or self made men. They are at the very bottom of the top or the very top of the bottom, they're the secretary and the valet to a very powerful count. But what's wonderful about this play is that the women stick by these men, even though the count himself and another nobleman decide they want to marry them. And this is all about they're getting their way and they're choosing to marry men of a lower class over noblemen. So it's this wonderful combination of the female agency and the sense, really, that there is much more social mobility in this world, or much more sort of flexibility around social hierarchies in this world than I think we would expect. So, again, this is just to give you a sense of why we find them so exciting. You know, they really shake our sense of what that early modern Spain might have been like in really salutary ways.
Yes, and in keeping with that idea that they really, in some ways, speak both to their own time but also to ours, I wonder if you could talk a little about what you've done so far in terms of getting these things on their feet on the stage, and maybe what you are thinking about for the future in terms of future performances.
Yeah, so we've had a very successful initiative which I launched about 3 or 4 years ago while I was director of the Clark Library at UCLA, where we established a partnership with a group in LA called Playwrights Arena that specializes in promoting the work of LA playwrights. So what we did there, that initiative is called Golden Tongues, and there's information about it also on the website, is we partnered with them to put before playwrights the plays of the Hispanic Golden Age. We led the playwrights to some databases, we gave them some background, and we encouraged them to write their own adaptations to contemporary LA. And so we've had about 7 plays now, or 8, and we are still continuing. And when we have the plays ready, we do staged readings of them, and a couple of them have gone on to have commercial runs as well. So we're very excited about that as one way to begin familiarizing audiences with the plays. Now, granted, some of these versions don't look very much like the originals, but we put it in the program, and we try to get people to think about what original might have led to this adaptation and so on. So it's one of the ways in which we're trying to get the plays out there in front of practitioners. Much more directly, we've had stage readings of the translations. And so we've worked with another theater group in LA called Chalk Rep that specializes in site-specific theater. And they've done readings of The Force of Habit and Women and Servants for us. More recently, we've launched this partnership with the UCLA Theater Department, which we're particularly excited about because we think that, again, actors in training, directors in training, those are the people whom we really, really want to reach. And so we are hoping that we'll be able to repeat the cycle where the working group translates a play in the winter and spring, we revise it in the summer. By the fall, we hand it over to the theater department and they do a staged reading. So they did A Wild Night in Toledo last fall, and this fall we hope to have them present the play we've just translated, which is called What We Owe Our Lies.
And what about anyone who might be interested in producing one of these translations that you have? Is there anything that they need to do in particular, or do they just go to the site?
Yeah, so we are very excited about these local initiatives, but of course, our broader goal and our great hope is that people across the U.S. and beyond will take a chance on these plays, will want to engage with them. So the site is really set up so that people can find the texts and take a look at them. We also want to encourage directors everywhere to get in touch with us if they have questions, if they would like some help with dramaturgy, if there are particular issues that they'd like us to help them out with on the plays. We really want to make ourselves available as a resource for the practitioners so that if there's anything keeping you, all of you out there, from saying, okay, this year we'll try one of these plays, we would like to help you with that. We would like to make this corpus a little more familiar, a little less intimidating, and encourage practitioners to take a chance on it. We think that you will not be disappointed.
And like I said, we'll have links to the Diversifying the Classics project in the show notes. So if any of you are interested in this after hearing the interview, please check it out. Barbara, thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been great.
It's my pleasure.
If you'd like to continue today's conversation, please visit howlround.com and follow HowlRound and @TheaterHistory on Twitter. A big thank you to the staff at HowlRound who make this show possible. Our theme music is The Black Crook Gallop, which comes to us courtesy of the New York Public Library Libretto Project and Adam Roberts. Thanks as well to Tip Kress, who designed our logo. And finally, thank you for listening.